Help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Vav. We left off on Daf Hey Amid Beis, 11 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We are continuing the sugya of a Beis Hapras. Beis Hapras, as we said, as we learned yesterday, can refer to one of the following three types of fields that are named the house or the area where there is a part, there is a piece. Pras means a half. We're speaking about either a field in which there used to be a grave buried. A person was buried there. There was a caver there. And tragically, that area was plowed over. And therefore, even though the way they would bury in those days, the depth of the burial versus the depth of the plow for sure, tragically, unrespectfully broke the body apart. But when it comes to the laws of Tumah, there is a possibility that a fragment of the mace is now on top of the ground, a little piece of bone. And even though, as we learned yesterday, you need to have a substantial amount of the human bones, if not all of it, the majority of it, or the skull, the spinal cord, if there's only a little part of a bone, a fragment of a bone, it doesn't convey tumas oil, but it does convey tuma if there is physical contact. So if there was a Beis Hapras, means a field where there was someone buried and it was plowed over, then there's a possibility that there is such a fragment on the periphery, on the top of the field. And whoever is going to walk through there inadvertently might become tummy. That's one type of Beis Hapras. The other type of Beis Hapras, another scenario where we use the same Beis Hapras definition, naming, and that is if there is a place, for sure someone is buried here. As we mentioned, it was common that we would mark the tzion by simply painting lime on the ground right adjacent to the area on top of where the person was buried. Now, lime with time will get washed away. So we no longer know exactly where is the cave. So when you walk into that area, there is a doubt. Maybe you walked over the cave. That's the other type of Beis Hapras. And really, there's a third area, which is also called the Beis Hapras, that we're just going to chazer over, but we're not going to focus on it going forward. And that is an area called a wailing field. So in the times where the Chevra Kadisha of one city would transport the body to the Chevra Kadisha of another city. So there was the place where they would exchange the mitzvah of taking charge of the remains of the person. And there were times that in such a field, a limb might have fallen off the deceased, and that limb might have gotten buried there. So it's also the concept of maybe there is the remains of a yid buried in this location. Now, appreciate the following. We are learning about Chol HaMoed, but this topic touches something beyond Chol HaMoed as well. And no one frames it better than the top Tosfos on Hey Amid Beis when we're speaking about, are you allowed to make a tzion? Are you allowed to mark? Do you have to mark? So there's a question of whether an area needs to be marked off to prevent potential tumah. If an area needs to be marked off, then you are allowed to do it even on Chol HaMoed. However, whichever area is deemed by Chazal as an area that need not be marked off, B'chlal, such an area may not be marked off on Chol HaMoed, because as we are going to continue to learn, it's not that Chol HaMoed you basically can do almost anything you want with a few restrictions. It's really the opposite direction. Chol HaMoed is like Yom Tov. You're not allowed to work. But then we have to find 5 heterim. You need a heter to work. And if something is deemed by Chazal as unnecessary, that is an activity which one will not be allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. So we're going to conclude this topic of the Beis Hapras, and again, as it relates to areas that may not be marked off on Chol HaMoed, we will introduce on Davav, already from the times of Chazal, that they already then also had at times a tzion, more as we have it today, and that is that they would place a stone on top of the area where someone was buried underneath. And the big difference between marking the ground with lime versus placing the stone is the following. When we mark the ground with lime, since the main halachic reason for this tzion is to prevent people from becoming tamei, they would mark it not directly above the mace, because it's hard to see something that's flat on the ground. If they would mark it directly on top, By the time you'll notice you're standing on the kavod, you're standing on the kavod, you're tummy already. So they would mark it a little bit outside of the area of the base. Now, we learned in the Mishnah, we learned in the Brisa that we quoted, not too far away, because every area that's marked becomes an area that's tummy. We don't want to add tumah in the Holy Land in an area that's not tummy. So they would mark it at very near to the kavod, but not directly above it. Masha'en kain, if they would place a stone as what we call a tombstone, the advantage of the stone is that it's standing upright. You can see it from farther away. So you don't need to put it beyond the boundary of the kavod. You actually put it directly above the boundary of the kavod. And some nuances regarding these types of tziyonim. Now we're going to move on and we're going to learn on Davav that which the Mishnah speaks about. Shluchim of Beis Din do go out on Chol HaMoed to inspect fields, whether they have kalayim. We're not speaking about people that are purposefully mixing their seeds when they plant. We're speaking about people that they planted a grain field. But the way the world is, nature is that from the wind, from certain bugs, that certain seeds might have been transported here, or they might have been in the ground and they woke up. And there is, as we'll learn today, a certain minimum amount of mixture that we tolerate halachically. But if it's beyond that measure, there's too much of a mixture. So the owner of the field has to uproot it. Now, there are many details about kalayim that I want to mention just in the intro. And I think the most important one is, unlike the laws of kashrus, if there's a mixture of meat and milk, whatever they write, echad b'shishim, whatever the mixture is, if you have that mixture, it's not kosher, whether you were aware, whether you were not aware. By kalayim, there's a certain aspect of marasayan involved, amazingly, that if it doesn't look like, it's less problematic, even if it's adjacent, not mamish mixed. That's not going to be touched on today. But there are times that if you can see that there are different patches, even though they're near, it's going to be less problematic, even though they're drawing nourishment from the ground together. And another very interesting, unique halacha regarding kalayim is that the knowledge and the contentment of the owner is a factor in it being kosher or not. So if I discover there's kalayim, the moment my reaction was to uproot it, everything else is kosher. In other areas of kashrus, I found a piece of meat fell into my pot. Just take it out. No, just take it out. It's not enough. Many times the whole thing becomes not kosher. By kalayim, you have to uproot it. When you uprooted it, when you became aware of it, you're good. Everything else is good, but you have to uproot it. And if people did not uproot it, then the shluchim of Beis Din would go out. We'll see who paid them, how did that function, and we'll see ultimately how there was a knas, a very strong penalty imposed on the people who were aware that even inadvertently, not that they planted it, but once I discovered that there's kalayim in my field, if I don't uproot it up until a certain point, so there was a real hefty penalty that Beis Din would impose upon that field owner. And Avavam and Beis, we're going to move on to the second Mishnah in the Masechta, and we're going to learn more about watering crops on Chol HaMoed, which is the first topic of the Masechta, right? Mashkin Beis HaShalchen. We're going to learn a very interesting difference between properly watering versus sprinkling a little bit of water, which is even less exertion. And we're going to see how, in other words, so not only is it difficult to define what's called excessive tircha, we're going to introduce today a concept of there's something called very little tircha. So there's very little tircha, which is more permitted, tircha and tircha yeseda, and we'll, God willing, start the third Mishnah also on Davav Amid Beis. That's going to introduce the following, that even when there is work that may be done on Chol HaMoed, there are times, we'll see, the words in Chazal is called Maisa Uman. Maisa Uman means that if it's done in a usual manner or in a professional manner, it may not be done. You have to do it sometimes, it has to be done, the work in an unusual manner. And the topic that we will use to discuss this issue, whether you can do it in a usual manner or in an unusual manner, is trapping rodents. And we're going to learn today, based on everything is in the Torah. We're going to learn about, and I think in English the word would be antology, the chachma of ants, and how exactly do you get rid of ant holes? And we're going to learn it in the Gemara. Phenomenal ideas. Without any further ado, again, Daf Hey Amid Beis, 11 lines before the bottom of the Amid, we established that there's a Beis HaPras, and we said if the Beis HaPras is that one in which the kavod was plowed over, Chevra Halkop, being that the reason why you would mark these areas is to prevent tumas oil. You don't mark such a field. You don't need to mark it b'chlal, and you may not mark it on Chol HaMoed, because what's the maximum? The worst case scenario is that there is a fragment of the bone that's on top of the ground. You can see that. And as we learned that if a person is rushing to do a mitzvah, even a kohen, someone who may not become contaminated with corpse tumah, can walk through such a Beis HaPras as long as they are very aware of, let me look at the ground, and if I'll see a bone, I'll blow it away. What type of field has to be marked? And therefore, what type of Beis HaPras is allowed to be marked on Chol HaMoed? If it's the other type of Beis HaPras, nothing was plowed over. We simply don't know where in the field is the kavod. And therefore, rabbinically, we don't say, well, it could be here, it could be there, and I can rely on a Safek, Tumah, B'Reshus Harabim, I can be lenient. The Chachamim says, no, mark the area in which there is a doubt, and a Kohen may not walk through any of that area, and if anyone walked in any part of that area, Midrabanan, they're coming. That has to be marked, because there you won't see it, because it's a complete corpse that's underground, that's conveying Tumas oil. Problem is, ask the Gemara, are you telling me that Sadash and Echlashwa, that if there's a field that was plowed over, it doesn't need a tzion, it doesn't need a marker? It doesn't seem that way from the following Braisa. It says in a Braisa, Matzah Sada Mitzuyanis, if you find a marked field, but ve'eno yodua, you don't know Mativa. Now, the two options here, just to make it clear, is whether this is a field in which there was a kavod that's lost, or whether it's a field in which there was a kavod that was plowed over. Chavre, see what it says? It says you find a field that's marked, and you don't know what type of Beis HaPras it is. Clearly, both types of Beis HaPrases need to be marked. That's a problem. But before we go to the answer, this is what the Braisa says. If there are trees planted there, one opinion holds trees or fruits, orchards need to be plowed. The plowing of an orchard is that essential to the quality of the fruits that will grow subsequently. Now, or trees, yeah, Elon, correct. That's the way it works. If you have an orchard, the presumption is, that's what we're saying, is that since someone planted trees there for their fruits, and it needs charisha, they plowed it. If it's plowed, then you can presume halachically that the issue is that the kavod got plowed over. It's a whole different type of issue. However, if there are no trees there, then biyadua, then you have to be choyesh that there is actually an intact kavod there, which is more problematic. Because there indeed, even though you don't see anything, like for example, if it's a field, for example, then if you are mindful and you blow the ground in front of you, you're allowed to walk through it, at least when you're going to do a mitzvah. If it's a field in which you don't know where the kavod is, even if you're going to do the Korban Pesach, even if it means that you're going to miss the Korban Pesach, if you don't take the shortcut, you're not allowed to take the shortcut, because you might walk over the corpse and you'll become tamei. A tamei person cannot bring the Korban Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with that. Rabbi Yehuda holds that until we have a scholar, that means a God-fearing Jew that lives in the city, that is aware of what happened or what did not happen in this area, we have to presume that the grave is intact. This resonates because, there's different levels. There's not upkeeping a cemetery, which is not respectful, but plowing over a cemetery, when you know that there is even only one Yid buried there, again, the plows would go as deep as the kavod. Our enemies did that to us, right? We say in Eichot Tzion that they plowed over Yerushalayim. That's what the Goyim do in Europe. They want to completely uproot. So that's, unless you know from a reliable scholar that that's what happened, even if there's an orchard, maybe they planted an orchard, but they wouldn't plow there. He's down lekavsos. Then you have to presume that the kavod is intact, which is more problematic, because if there's a chayish, if we suspect that the kavod is intact, then even if you're going to do a mitzvah, you don't have the heter of just blow the ground in front of you, because the issue isn't only about the bone fragment, which you could see if you pay attention. It's a worse issue. You don't know where underground is the kavod, and if you walk over it, you'll become tum. Not everyone. The ein hakol b'kiyan means why do you have to have a zaken or a chacham? Because if you're not a God-fearing, observant yid, you might not know what happened, and don't presume something negative. A very Hasidic concept. Now, so we get the bottom line is there's a brayso that's saying you have a field that's marked, and you don't know which type of beis hapras. A raya that both types of beis haprases needs to be marked. We're saying right now that a beis hapras that it was plowed over is never marked. So if a beis hapras that's plowed over is never marked, what's your doubt? If it's marked, you know it's the other type. So the Gemara says no. You only have to mark a field in which the kavod is lost. If it would have been plowed over, you wouldn't have marked it. But before it was plowed over, if it was plowed over, it was marked. The case of the Braisa is at a later time, now you don't know, maybe it was plowed over. So it's still marked from before, but it doesn't take away the possibility that after it was marked because it needed to be marked, maybe later it was plowed over. Let's read it inside. There was in the past for sure a grave that was buried there. In the past, it was not plowed over. Only that beis hapras needs to be marked, and it was marked. But a certain period of time passed. The marking is still there. You can see, there's this type of lime around the field. But now, maybe at a later point, they plowed over. For which the Tanach says, Yesh Ba'yolanos, if there are trees, then you presume that it was plowed over, right? 3 lines before the bottom, and Ein Ba'yolanos, and if there's no trees, at least even according to the Chachamim, come on, everyone knew that there was a grave here, Mela, to use it to plant an orchard, which is not respectful, but that's one level of disrespect. But then Biyadua, that it's only Avad Ba'kever, the grave is still intact and it's lost there. Now there's nuances, even if there are trees. People plow everywhere. The Gemara says maybe if the trees are in the inner part of the field, so between the trees and the inner part, people plowed. But maybe the kavod was beyond the trees, outside of the trees, right? But the kavod mibaroi, the kavod is outside. Maybe the area where the kavod is was not plowed over, even if there are trees. The last line. So the Gemara says, you're right. But just like Ula said elsewhere, that the scenario was where the trees were in the outer part of the field, obviously, if the trees would only be in the inner part and the marking on the ground would go beyond the trees substantially, then it doesn't resolve regarding how do you know that they plowed it over. But here it's let's just the nuances. 1 second. If the trees are only in the periphery, so maybe the opposite. Maybe they plowed only between the trees and the kavod is inside. The dilma tuma megavoy v'lanis mibaroi. So the Gemara says, you're right. It must be that when does the Chachamim say that if there are trees, then you should presume that it was plowed over. It was only the misubachin where the trees are intertwined or intertwined or all over the place. There's trees inside, there's trees outside, there's trees everywhere. That is only where you can say that they plowed over. Okay, that since ha'amarin ein marchikin siyan mimakim tuma shloila hafsid eretz Yisrael, that when you place a marker, again we just quoted this in the intro, even if it's not a tombstone, even if it is that old style just marking the ground with lime, and therefore you can't only put it over the grave, you have to put it outside of the grave, but don't do it too far away, because when you see that line, that's tummy. Don't add to tuma. So therefore, he says that the kavod was near a tree, or there are trees only in the outside, and people for sure, people put the marker on the outside, so we presume, and the marker is near a tree. The trees might only be in the outside. The markers are near the trees, which means the marker was near the kavod. And if it's near the trees, then we plowed over. Well, people say once they plowed between the trees, they plowed it all over the place. But the point is that the Chachamim hold that there's such a possibility, which is tragic. And again, since the marker was placed near the trees, and the marker has to be placed near the kavod, not to add the tuma, so therefore we have that they were chodesh over the kavod. Okay.
Does a gravesite remain holy indefinitely? Does the soul stay? Well,
so first of all, when you speak about holy, it's ironic. that Kavan is saying the right words. There was a kedusha there, and on the other hand, there's tumah there, and really one goes hand in hand, because there is no tumah where there is no kedusha. And just the words that we know, I think we mentioned it yesterday. The Alter Rebbe speaks about it a bit in Igeres Chav Zayin, when he's speaking about how tzaddikim are in this world even more after their passing than prior to, is that in spite of the fact that the neshama has an aliyah, the ruach, which is the lower part of the soul, has the ability to go up and down to Gan Eden, and the nefesh stays together with the remains. And the Rebbe enlightens us, so does the Yechida, but that's a whole different topic. But the nefesh is there. So dafke, because there is a nefesh of a yid, that's why koiches of Tumah also want to take more nourishment that was allocated for them. It's like, for example, you have viruses, bacteria is only where there's life. Where there's death, there won't be viruses because they're like parasites. If there's nothing for them to take from, they won't be there. Okay, so I think it's good to use the words kedusha, and that goes for every Jew, and especially if it's a holy Jew, if it was a tzaddik, and at the same time, because of the fact that the neshama is not properly fully in the body, so it cannot repel the koiches hatuma. It's weakened, and therefore there is this additional amount of tuma. And again, that's why in Tzfas and in many other places in Eretz Yisrael, they paint the stones with that color because of the fact that it's holy, adarab, and it's shayech for there to be a unwanted nourishment for the koiches hatuma. And let's go weiter. So what I mentioned, what Svika mentioned after we finished this the Chabad.org recording, is that the Arizal, we were so lucky. The Arizal went out in Eretz Yisrael, this idea of not adding Tumah in Eretz Yisrael. So in the Gemara, in Chazal and Baba Basra, we have Rabbi Noah, that he would actually, when there would be a location that we knew there was a grave more or less here, he would dig underground to find exactly where the limits are, where the boundary of the person is, so not to add Tumah. You know, there were earthquakes in Eretz Yisrael. Sometimes even stones, they rolled away a bit from the right place. So we already had that in time immemorial, that great tzaddikim affixed the tziyonim in the right places, not to add to tumah, and to know where the right places. The greatness of the Arizal is that he would tell you who's buried there. Wow. It means he would go to a location and say, here is buried so-and-so, there is buried so-and-so. Gavaldik.
Is there a chashash of an area that's not marked?
So let's go like this. Let's read. I want to answer your question with the next line. So Rabbi Yehuda said like this, that if you have a doubt, even if there's, let's say, circumstantial evidence, it would have been so advantageous for people to plow over, which would change the status, which would make it a lesser problem. Rabbi Yehuda says that if there was a zaken or a Talmud, that means a Jew that's a God-fearing Jew, and he understands halacha, he understands the importance of tumah and tara. Unless someone like that is in the city and tells you that tragically, I know that they plowed over, never presume that it was plowed over. Now, why can't you have the testimony of just anyone? Because just anyone would not be aware. You find the zaken and the chacham, find a scholar, a holy scholar, and ask him, what's the story? The other people, Fisha Inakol became a dover. And they might make a mistake. They don't know that much of what's happening. They don't appreciate that much the consequences of was it plowed, was it not plowed? So you can't rely on them. So Amar Abaya, Shma Mino, let's go, let's flip this. You know what you see from over here? That Surma Mirabanan, that someone who's aspiring to be a God-fearing Chassidish Yid and caring about halacha, if such a person lives in the city, Kol Mila Demasa Alei Ramya, he's responsible for everything that's happening in the city connected to Yiddishkeit. In other words, in the words of Hasidim, right, the tzaddik and pelts is outlawed. You know, the tzaddik and pelts is our example that if the room is cold, so there's two ways of warming up yourself up. Either putting on a beautiful fur coat, good for you, and the whole room will freeze to death, or lighting up the fireplace. And then you'll make it warm for other Yidden also. So the concept of having a Yid in a city that's a scholar, who's disconnected from the city, is sacrilegious. We don't accept that. We don't accept that. You have to be involved. If you know and you care, it cannot be for you. Weiter. Only for you. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rabbi Yehuda, now we are introducing again this other type of tzion, which we are more familiar with, the tombstone. That matzah even mitzuyanes, if you find a single stone, and by the way, they wouldn't just place a stone because it wasn't like today tombstones. They would also paint some lime on the stone. Because what do you think? There aren't any stones in Israel. We know Eretz Yisrael. There's stones all over the place. We're not going to say, there's a stone, there's someone buried underneath it. They would put that same lime, but they would put it on a stone so you can see it from far. The beautiful thing is tachteh hatamei. That's the chiddush. Tachteh hatamei means not like when you paint lime on the ground, that they never painted the lime on top of the limit of the mace. They went beyond. Again, they went beyond because you don't see it that well. You're going to find out that you're standing on the cave when you're tummy already. So they would have to add. Now we try not to add tumah in Eretz Yisrael, so they wouldn't put it too far away, but it wouldn't be on top. A stone tachteh hatamei. That's the chiddush. They never had the stone going beyond the place of the cave. Now what happens if you have two stones? And by the way, they are in close proximity. How do you define that? I don't know. Two stones in close proximity. Both of them have this lime paint on top of it. So vadai, under each stone, there's tumah. What's the question? Is there also tumah in between it? So it depends. If there's lime on the ground in between them, then yeah, not only under the stones is there tumah, but then beinayim is also tumah. However, if there's no lime in the ground in between it, then we say beinayim tahor. Now, by the way, there are nuances. I just want people to know the nuances is that even if you don't go over a kaver, when you come within 4 amas of a kaver, if there isn't a halachic mechitza, right, then you'll become tamei as well. Fine, right. Now, says the Gemara, you're telling me all you need to know is whether there's lime or not? We don't need to use plowing as an indication. What would that mean? Where do we get this plowing indication? But did we not learn that if you find one stone, mitzuyanes, like we learned above, only tachtei tamei? Let's go further. If you find 2 stones, this brayso doesn't speak about lime. It speaks about a new thing. If there is an indication, somehow, you have to be a farmer, that they plowed, you can see from the ground, then we say, if they plowed, again, which Jew, unless we know, would plow over a grave? Then we say that beinayim is tahor. But if you don't have an indication of plowing, then tamei, even if there's no, in other words, it's not lime, was it plowed in the past? So how do you reconcile it? I'll tell you. The brayso goes on the brayso. The brayso is the following. When you put lime on a stone, you have to know how that works. Some of it at times will spill over and go a little bit beyond the stone on the ground. So that's the pshat. So you see lime was poured on top of the stone, but you also see, look on the ground, like when you paint, like when we paint the wall, you paint the wall, I paint the wall. You think you're going to get the wall, you get a little bit on the ground, a little bit on the ceiling. It spills over for people who don't know what they're doing. It spilled over. Now it's spilled over in a way that it's thin. Now there's 2 ways. Either taka, there was someone buried, so you put some more lime, or no, you didn't put anything on the ground, but it spilled over. So if there was plowing done in between, you know what happens when you plow? When you plow, you shake the earth. When you shake the earth, some of the lime, you have to know how lime, it's not like our type of paint that once it dries. That lime could have spilled over. Beinayim tahor. Beinayim tahor is because there's lime on the ground, but you know why there's lime on the ground? Because there was a lot of movement on the ground. The emer, because we can say machmas choydeshu because of the fact that you were plowing. Now there's different versions. The ikpal or the bach says the words, the iklaf means it got peeled off. However, the Eloi, if there was no indication of plowing in between, then we say, Sid, the Beni Ubeni, who then someone placed the lime there. Why would a person place this lime? This lime in the Holy Land was placed, you know what? Just to indicate one thing, that underneath it is Tuma V'Tamei. Okay. In other words, when there is no lime in between the stones, let me word it that way, even if there's no indication of plowing, it's going to be tahor. That's how everything is reconciled. Amar Ravasi, says Ravasi, final indication. Think about, you have a field. Fields have boundaries. How do they make a boundary in the field? Very common is that on the boundary, they would raise the earth. They would make it into a mound. The mound was the physical marker that here this field ends and there the other field starts. Now, what happens if there is lime painted on top of the mound? Why did we say before that you don't put lime directly above? You have to put it a little bit off, a little bit beyond, because people won't see it until it's too late. But if there is a natural mound, it's not maybe as tall as a stone, but that resolves, people will see it. If you put lime on the mound, people will see it. And we try not to add too much to Eretz Yisrael. We would ideally only like to mark directly above, not beyond. That's one din. There's another din. If you find an entire boundary border painted with lime, does that mean the whole field is a Beis HaKvaros, or does it mean that under the mound people were buried? So both of these topics are addressed. If you find Meitzet Echad Mitzuyan, Hu Tamei, guys, there are two dinim here. Number one, the whole field is tar. If the whole field would have been tamei, they wouldn't have painted the whole field with lime, but they would have painted all of the four boundaries. Number two, you know what's tamei only underneath it, like we mentioned, because since it's a mound, so therefore people can see it from far. They would do it like by a stone, only directly above. And the same thing is shnaim if there are two of the boundaries, whether it's from either sides, whether it's perpendicular, I don't care if it's only two or only three, only under the mound. Shnayim, only hengtamim, only directly underneath it, there's tuma v'chalasad kol tahira. Even if there's three, again, hengtamim v'chalasad kol tahira. If there's four, here we're going to have again two chedushim. Number one, my friends, the whole field is tummy. Number two, whenever an entire area was demarked, the rule was you put the marker beyond the tumah, not directly over it. Which is a good thing to know, which means that if you only walked on top of the mound, you're tar. Because since it's on all four, it means it's marking the whole area inside of it. Again, you have these two laws. In other words, we're trying to point out over here, when you have a whole field that's marked, my friends, why don't we say avakasha? Why don't we say that only near the boundaries there's tumah? Maybe someplace in the middle of the field there isn't. We would never do that because we don't confuse people by creating doubts. Maybe there's tumah. The only time you would mark all four boundaries is if that entire area would have been full. If the entire area is not full, like what do we do today in a Beis HaChaim? Every cave is marked separately. By the way, today in a cemetery, there are places that we wash, let's say they wash Negelvasser. Just to know, here in LA, for some tragic reason, some cemeteries, they put the washing station within 4 amos of a caver or under a tree, which is over a caver. So you didn't accomplish anything. But if the washing station is done in a way where it's farther than 4 amos and there's no oil, you can wash Negelvasser in the Beis HaChaim because you're not tamei. You're not tamei. We don't say, the whole Beis HaChaim. You understand those? If you're marking a whole area, the only reason why they mark the whole area and nothing there is marked is because the whole thing is filled with kvarim. If not, they wouldn't do it. If not, they would put a mark on top of every place. So there'll be at least some places that you'll know that are not coming. Atkan, the parsha of Sioins, and L'chaim to that is going to be the whole Masechta deals with things that are of this type of nature. Again, we're going to learn in the 3rd chapter of the base in Torah Shabbat Peh of the dinim of mourning. And we should be yoitze just learning about it.
Did they use stones back then too, or it was just?
They did stones with lime. Yes, yeah, nothing as good, nothing nearly as good as today.
They had the information of...
Not necessarily so. No, not necessarily so. Okay, says the Gemara. It says in the Mishnah that Anchal Moed Shluchim of Beis Din are allowed to, and therefore they dafka would go out to inspect fields to see if there was a inadvertent growth of kilayim. What they go out on cholamoid, it's not true. It's not true. God forbid. It appears, we know from another Mishnah, you know when they went out? They went out 1 month prior, 1 month and a day. They went out on the 15th of Adar. Vinimino says again, Shkolim, again, Nachamol Chazeding, Be'echad Ba'adir, Mashmiyim ala Shkolim. Beis Din is responsible to notify, to remind everyone. This is a side of the fact that we read Parsha Shkolim. It's connected. As they would notify Chevra, get ready to make your big half a shekel donation. Number 2, they would notify people, start being aware of whether Kalayim inadvertently grew in your field. Why and Echad Ba'adir? Because that's when things begin to sprout. Now, B'chamisha Asar Boy, on the 15th, many things happen. Number 1, walled cities, read the Megillah, etc. Number 2, that is the time where Shluchim of Beis Din are responsible to take away any type of public danger, meaning the yoitzim, they go out, lakavitz, etzadrachim, to clear the drachim from thorns, ulasakan arachoivis, and to repair the streets. We learned this yesterday also, and to measure the mikvois that might have gotten the deficient from the 40 saw. And v'oisim kol tzorchei rabim, and mutzainen es hakvaris. That is when they would mark the graves, and v'yoitzim ala kalayim. You see, it says in a Mishnah they go out for kalayim on the 15th of Adar. Before we go on, Rashi has a question, and then Yisraelim have a question. Why is the Gemara only asking regarding kalayim? Didn't we just learn in the Mishnah regarding mutzainen es hakvaris? We also learned that they do it on Chayil Shalmoid. Why? They do it on the 15th of Adar. So you should know that all the other items other than Kalayim, even in the Havamina, it made sense that you have to do it twice. You know, you can mark a grave with this line. Could be there was a thunderstorm. Could be there was something, the later rains, and it got washed away. Do it once, do it twice. You repair a road, it gets broken again. Kalayim, in one season, once Kalayim will grow. That was the Havamina. And once you uprooted it, there's nothing left to uproot. So since it was already done on the 15th of Adar, why would they go again? That's what Rashi says, why we're only focusing on Kalayim. So the Gemara answers to one. That Khan, when we just learned the Mishnah, they go out on the 15th of Adar is bebachir, and the early crops, they grow earlier for Kalayim. And that's when they appear, so that's where there's a potential of Kalayim. Khan, our Mishnah is saying they go out on Cholamoyed, Pesach, that's ba'aful, late crops, they only came out later. Or v'chadamar, similar but not the same, kan b'zroim, grains, you should know, grow earlier. Grains grow in the month of Adar in the Holy Land. And kan, and our Mishnah going out on the Cholamoid, is birakis and vegetables. Omar Avasi, Omar Rabbi Yechanan. That when do we say that the shluchim don't go out earlier than the 15th of Adar? They don't go out earlier, is Ella b'she'ei nitzanikar, when the sprouts are not recognizable. In other words, normally prior to the Echad Ba'adar, to the 15th of Adar, you wouldn't notice it. But you know what? It's not so perfect. Sometimes you have to also know whether it's a leap year, whether it's not a leap year. Sometimes this year there was a lot of rain and the sprouts began to grow earlier. It's not a magic date. If Beis Din is aware that things are growing very early this year, they would go out earlier. And all of that is leading up to the following question. What's magical about Cholamoid? In other words, it's not that at that date it grows. It grows in that time. What you think, if it's recognizable on Cholamoid, you think it would not be recognizable at Erev Yontif. And Erev Yontif, there's no problem with going to work. Working on Cholamoid, that's the whole Masechta. Begin with the premise, don't work on Cholamoid. Then you're looking for a heter. Why would you dafka go on Cholamoid? So answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, because schar pu'ula the moizli gabon, because the money that the Beis Din has to pay to these inspectors will be a lesser amount. Why would you have to pay for the same job a lesser amount of money? Supply and demand. How many workers are looking for work? So on Cholamoyed, since many works are not permitted, people who need to work for a living, there are more people looking to work. So you end up paying them less. They'll be excited to work. Prior to Yom Tov, a lot more workers. Prior to Yom Tov, there's a minig Yisrael that the plumbing breaks in the house. Anything that can go wrong happens at covered Yom Tov before you. So everyone is busy. So you have to pay more for a worker. Now, what does that prove? It proves that the shluchim of Beis Din were paid from communal funds, because there could have been another system that they notified people, you inspect your fields for Kalayim. Everyone had that chance for 2 weeks or whatever the time is. And then when shluchim would go and inspect, they could have set up the system where if they found Kalayim in someone's field and the shluchim would uproot it, the field owner would have to pay them. If that would have been the system, we would not care whether they have to pay more money. That's part of the penalty. And the ideal would be, don't work on Cholamoyed. The fact that we are concerned, and because it's going to cost $10 less, first days, they're going to go work on Cholamoyed, when we pay these shluchei bezin, it's mitrumas halishka yavin luhu. It's amazing. Trumas halishka means half a shekel funds that are used primarily for communal karbanos. But we learned this in Shkolim, that there was a surplus, and the surplus was allowed, and it was used for communal needs, including paying the shluchei bezin to go and inspect fields. Because if you would have thought that mididuhu yahavina lahu, in China, lahavdil, right? When they would shoot someone, they would charge the family for the bullet. Verstehst? No, the system could have been that you find Kalayim, there's other penalties, and then you also charge them for the inspector's fee. If that would have been the case, 3 lines from the bottom, is my nafkalan minayu. Why would we care if it would be more expensive to hire workers? Kol kama debo, whatever is needed is liteilahu. They should have to give. Elama, if it's coming from communal funds, then that justifies you dafke designating chalamayid work. Weiter. Now, the at kama, this is a detail in Hilchas Kalayim. Like we mentioned, it's amazing. People are familiar with echad b'shishim or bitol or echad b'meya, echad b'mosayim. How much mixture, we're speaking about a grain field. You don't want to have different seeds growing together. If there are other seeds, there is a certain amount that we allow to continue. And what is that amount? We'll see. The cutoff point is 1 in 24. If it's less than 1 in 24, then you can allow it to remain, even though what we're saying right now is only Gemara Rashi and some Rishonim, other Rishonim learn it very differently, but let's read it inside. As we learned in Mishnah and Kalayim, that kol sa'a sheyesh ba daf vav amid beis roiva zera mimin achad, that in every saw, guys, 6 kav, just to know, 6 kavs is 1 saw. A quarter of a saw, it's a 24th. 6 times 4. So if you have a 1/24th or more, look at the words in the Mishnah. Yemait. Yemait means you don't even have to uproot all of it, according to the way Rashi learns. Yemait means bring the ratio down to less than a 1 in 24. Very unlike kashrus. Kidding, when you find something not kosher, get rid of it. Here we're just making sure that it's not beyond that ratio. Okay, there's a lot of nuance here. That many Rishonim say that's only because you did not plant it. It happened by itself. If you planted it, then you got to uproot all of it. Then let's go with Rashi. It doesn't make any of that such difference. And Vehatanya asks the Gemara, says in a Braisa that Hiskinu, that Beis Din made a takana, that if Shluchei Beis Din were to find that there is climb in your field, you know what they would do? They would declare all of the produce in your field ownerless. Hefker Beis Din hefker. That was a good penalty. No one left climb in the field. Shiur mafkirim kolos adekulam. Gewaldik. In other words, it's mashma from the top line from the Mishnah and Kalayim. Yemayit sounds like the shluchim brought it to a lower ratio. In other words, the shluchim uprooted it. Here we're saying, forget about shluchim uprooting it. They declare everything ownerless. So they don't need to do both, because when they declare it ownerless, everyone is going to go into that field and they're going to take. Now, how can they take it if it's not kosher? So again, just we mentioned in the intro that some of it has to do with, is there the willing of the owner? The moment it's hefker, it's not problematic. There's very interesting details about Kalayim, but let's go right. So they were like Kashem. Indeed, there was an evolution of time. Khan, the top line, you're understanding it correctly. The Shliach Beis Din would uproot it. Not even all of it. He would bring it to less than the ratio of 1 in 24. But that was before they made the enactment that no, we got to penalize. Khan, the Brais is la'achad atakana, and we're going to go through phases. The time we learned. But initially, what did the Shluchei Beis Din do if they found Kalayim? They uprooted it, and they would leave it there. What did they accomplish? Nothing, because the Balabatim were happy. Imagine you own a field, and you find Kalayim. You have to uproot it. Why should I uproot it? The shluchim are going to uproot it. And after they uproot it, my animals will enjoy the fruit that they're going to leave. It's a double win. Number one, that the shluchim of Beis Din, the government is doing the weeding for me. And so they says that they're benefiting too much. They were not motivated to uproot it. So they made a takana, that they should uproot it, but they should throw it out. But they still uprooted it. So still the balabatim, and your back is hurting, you go into the field, and you see that, there is some kalayim, say that I'll wait for let the Shliach Beis Din work. He's getting paid from the Trumas Halishka. The same for free. So then ultimately they made a takana, shiur mafkirim kol hasadekulam. None of your not sadeh doesn't mean the real estate. It didn't say your real estate doesn't belong to you. It means that they said that all of the produce is ownerless, and oh boy, that people make sure when they found Kalayim, the Beis Din used to have a lot of power. Today, if Beis Din would make such a takana, the city would uproot the Beis Din and throw the Beis Din in front of their behemoths. You understand? And then, no, they had the koyach. Okay, Mishnah.
Quick question. How could the Beis Din prioritize saving the communal funds over Jews working on Shalom? Like
No. Okay, no. It's the Ariel. I love what you're saying, but you have to frame it different. I know we see how they worked. Yeah, I know that people like us might have taken a different direction. So it shows you the priorities. First of all, they understood that it should come from communal funds. I think that must have been step number one. And number two, once it's coming from communal funds, then it's going to happen on Chol HaMoed.
Yeah.
We also see the fact is that people are very lenient by Chol HaMoed nowadays. It must have been, it's not a new thing, but we're too lenient. Learning this is very helpful. There's all of the 5 Atadim probably will allow us to do exactly what we're doing. I don't think anyone is violating, but the heter became so ingrained. It's like when there's an Edo forever, you forget about you can't carry. No, there's a problem that has to be overlooked. And the justification of saving money for the Trumas Halishka is a justification. Okay, Mishnah. Second Mishnah in the Masechta, we're going back to the watering, and now we're quoting Befedish Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Oimer. And this is where we have a rule that we're going to learn a Tosfos soon, that even if it's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov against the majority opinion, when he's quoted in the Mishnah, we will rule like him. It's called Mishnahs, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Kav v'Naki. Kav means that sometimes you have food, not a lot, but it's good. Now, there it's about flour. The flour is only one kav. Obviously, is reina, good, no whole wheat. Whole wheat is terrible in halach. Whole wheat is for the animals. We want to have a good, not bleached, but good, pure flour. So anyway, back to what may or may you not do. If you have water that's pulled under a tree, and there is a neighboring tree that needs more water, you are allowed to divert the water from one tree to the other, which means you'll make a mini canal on Chol HaMoed. What did we learn? We learned to Endaf Beis, this machloekes that will come out of here again. How do you define Davar Ha'aved, which is the heter that we're learning about? So minimally, Davar Ha'aved means that if you already own something, and your principal will suffer a loss if you will not work, you are allowed to work. So an orchard tree, if you won't divert the water, the fruits that begin budding, on Tu B'Shvat, they will get ruined. That's called a loss of principle. So you're allowed to work. But when you are diverting the water, you may not water the entire field. Obviously, this is not the Mishnah on Daf Beis HaShalchim. This is what we call the Beis Habal. Beis Habal means a field that could live off rainwaters alone. Now, if you would add water, then there'll be even more produce. You not doing that work means that you are losing profit. This is the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that holds losing profit is not called a loss. Losing profit is not called a davar ha'aved. Weiter, zroyim shaloi shasu lifnei hamoed. If you have seeds that were not watered before Yontif, they were not regularly watered, lo yashke b'moed. Again, we're speaking about a Beis Habal, all right? No harm will come to them. Yeah, they would have been bigger and better and more expensive, so you're not going to make that revach. Beis Habal. However, the Chachamim, now we already learned on the Beis Hamad, that's Rabbi Meir. In both cases, he allows, you can water a Beis Habal, the Zeroyim, even if they don't need, and therefore they were not watered regularly, you can water it on Chol HaMoed. Why? Because watering it will make that product bigger, better, grow quicker. If you won't water it, you're going to lose that profit. And Abmeir is a lot more liberal when it comes to the understanding of Davar Ha'aved. Okay, says the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda, we are qualifying Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That im hoysasada mitunenes. The word mitunenes means it dried out, which means if you had a field that used to be moist. Fields are moist because under the ground there's a lot of water sources. So there are many times that a field was moist, which is why up until this point it never needed to have human irrigation, but it's dried out. If it's dried out, so even though it was a base habal until now, if you understand how land is, you can say, no, I need to water it. And even Eliezer ben Yaakov will hold you mutter. Tanya nami yochi. That kisho amru asur. Lahashkoisim b'moyed, which is the base habal, a field that normally doesn't need human irrigation. It suffices. It lives off rainwater. If the fact is that these type, every plant is different. This product was regularly watered. It's used to getting a l'chaim every day. What, you're not going to give it that for 7 days? It's not good. Even Eliezer ben Yaakov will be moed. So it's not just beis habal, beis hashalchim. You have to know about this product. And that's a great simon. If we were doing it every day or every week, we were regularly watering it before, why were we doing it? Because it needs that. When you pull that back, it's going to die. It's going to shrivel. It's going to get lost. That's loss of principle. That's another example. If you didn't water it regularly because the field was moist, now it got dried out, so get mutter. However, gutted means a dry field. It means if you have a field that is dry, and nevertheless, the type of plant that you are planting can grow from a dry field. It's not going to get lost. That's the base habal field that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds. You cannot water on Cholamoid, and the Chamatina was. Now, learn from here. High tarbitza, garden patch, very common. Even people today have garden patches. Shari litarbutze b'choilo demado. Here we're adding a new nuance. See, guys, there's watering, and then there's sprinkling. Watering means a lot more. Sprinkling means obviously a lot. Yes. So he's saying shmamina. That you can sprinkle it. Now, what's shmamina? Why? Hold on. These vegetables won't get ruined if it won't be sprinkled. They won't grow larger. So how shmamina? And look inside the third Tosfos. Tosfos says, I don't understand. I mean, if we would paskin like the Chachamim, I get it. The Chachamim don't make such a difference. But Tosfos' question is based, since we know, Kaimelon, Mishnah Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Kavanaki. So we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. He does not allow for you to water something that won't get ruined if it would lack the water. So Tosfos answers, I'm skipping a few lines, that's the whole point. The tarbitza eina ki'im hashka apurta. Sprinkling is less work than watering. In other words, that's how he teaches. That since Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov himself will allow for you to water a field that dried out. It's because now, and you can water it, and that's work. So sprinkling, which is much less work, could be done even if you won't lose the principle without the sprinkling. Let's go back on the Gemara. And the proof is, Sada got it. Why are you allowed to water? Sada got it. My tama means, why do the Chachamim allow for you to water a dried field, even though it's growing regardless? Because water will add benefit. Water will add profit. Because if it would have been afla, if that which was planted, if it would have grown later, by watering it, you make it charfa, you make it grow earlier. Hachinami, afla, mashvele cherpa, that by sprinkling a garden patch, and that's the chiddush of Tosfos, even though we're speaking about Chachamim, but we're speaking about Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. But since you have a shita that allows a field, now Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is machmer. So he's only machmer by watering, not by sprinkling. So learns Tosfos. Tanach Rabbanan. Marbitzins today, Lavan Bashvis. You are allowed to sprinkle. And guys, this is even a base habal, a grain field that doesn't need anything beyond rainwater on the Shemitah year. Wow. Here again. It must be just like remember we learned watering in this Masech already, right? Watering, Koren Kol, is only a tulda. A tulda on Shemitah, guys, is at max only us and midrabanan. So the Rabbanan did not make a isur when it comes to marbitzim, to sprinkling. But you can't sprinkle a whole field. We learned before about a garden patch. That's different, but not a whole field. More work. So that's not a problem. Okay, we're learning a machlekes tanoim. Amar Rav Huna like Hashem, that the brayso that forbids is following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Guys, a whole field you may not do. And the ha is Rabbanon. Tanya Idach, we learned in another brayso. Marbitzin stay 11 out of Shvius. You are allowed to sprinkle, according to everyone, a field that doesn't need the water, but it's going to add benefit before Shemitah, even though the whole purpose for you sprinkling the water is for these vegetables to grow out on the Shemitah year. Nothing wrong with that. Again, we learned a little bit in this Masechta about Tosefa Shemitah. It doesn't apply to this type of sprinkling. Very good. More than that, you are even allowed to sprinkle a grain field on the Shemitah year, like we just said, even though midrabanan watering is problematic. Sprinkling is not problematic, only if your intent is for the vegetables to grow out after the Shemitah year. What this final Baraisa is really implying is that you may not sprinkle vegetables on the Shemitah year. For it to grow on the Shemitah year, that already they did not allow. Let's start learning the new Mishnah. Again, we're learning about work. Even when work is permitted, at times you have to make a shinui. That's going to be this Mishnah. And the topic will be trapping rodents. I know here in LA right now, it's a very relevant topic. Every Baruch Hashem in the shul, I think the people, we put out over here a lot of traps. We had a neshama that was embodied in a rat. And if you would see the faces of a few people 2-3 weeks ago over here, and they told me it wasn't me. It was the mouse that was running behind me. So, when it rained over here, there's a lot of tzfreilach. You can trap it. So says the Mishnah. You are allowed to trap ishus. Now, what's ishus? We'll see in the Gemara, a certain type of rodent. And v'eso achbarim, our chaverim, the mice, both from a stei ha'ilan, from a grain field, and, stei ha'ilan from an orchard. Guys, mice do much more damage to an orchard because they eat up the roots. And even from stei lavan, where they don't damage as bad, but they do damage. And you know what this Tana holds? You are allowed to do it. Usually, you don't even have to make a shinoi, kidarkoi, both on Chol HaMoed, which is a chiddush, and also on Shemitah. Now, guys, what would be the problem trapping rodents on Shemitah? All of the prohibitions are related to improving the land. And the answer is that rodents, not only will they ruin the produce, they also are mazik the ground. So you're trapping the rodents, not because you want to better the ground. You're doing it, you want to save your produce. You are allowed to do it, even though you are also bettering the quality of the ground because it's not being beaten up by these rodents. They disagree. They agree that you can trap rodents, but they say like this. From an orchard, like we mentioned, since the damage is greater the damage, the more heter. You can trap it in the usual manner. But from a grain field, Itaka does damage, lesser amount of damage. You are allowed to work on, you can trap them, but in an unusual manner. And we're going to learn today, tomorrow, we'll see how far we can get. Pashat, how to trap rodents. What's called usual? Not calling up Terminex. How do you trap and what's called unusual? Another din. If you have a fence, you already have a fence, but the fence is breached. You are allowed to fix the breach. What does that imply? You can't build a new fence. You can even build a new fence, which is what will be the chiddush. We'll see, because you're not allowed to prevent people from taking your produce on Shemitah. It's hefker. But you can build a fence because you can leave the door open. Okay, a lot of details. Let's begin about trapping rodents, and let this be the kol haloy med hilchos trapping rodents. We should be zoicha that this should trap all the rodents. The learning. First of all, what's issues? Amar Rav Yehuda, Beria, it's a creature she'ein lo einayim, that has no eyes. And I really thank Keva. That's an amazing picture. It's a certain type of mole. You see the big nose on the WhatsApp, or you can Google it yourself. It's called life science, but there's no eyes. A blind mole. Okay, actually, there are some who say that it's not a blind creature, but it's a creature like a mole. A certain family, if they live underground, they come out very rare, but when you come out from under the ground, they are blinded by the sun. Whatever it is. Micro, where do we find in scripture a mention of a creature that has no eyes? In other words, this is consistent with If you look in nature and you find a creature without eyes, it doesn't mean anything to me. If you're telling me that in Torah there's something called a creature without eyes, you have to find a pasuk. And there's a pasuk. The pasuk says that K'moi shablul temes yahalech, just like a snail that melts and slithers away, similarly, nefel ashes, the ashes will fall, the issues, this creature. And now the pasuk in Tehillim is defining what is the issues. Bal chazul shemesh, the creature that never sees the sun. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. Tadanas issues that you can trap the issues, Esu achbarim, and mice, rats, from a stay alavan, and even a stay ha'ilan, that for sure, even a stay kidarkoi. Now we're introducing something new. You are allowed to destroy ant holes. Asks the Braisa, how do you destroy an ant hole? That's so pashut. I grew up in Brazil. I can tell you that these big mountains of ants, how do you get rid of them? How do you get rid of them? I'm sure I'll tell you how. That you bring the earth, the dirt, take a piece of this anthole, bring it to another anthole. We'll see it has to be far away. And when you introduce this mound to that mound, they kill each other. Amazing. Now, really, there's a machlekes rishonim. Do they kill each other? Or they, when they feel there's a new earth here, they attack the earth, and when they attack the earth, they end up killing the other ants. Chaverim call Yisrael, not Chaverim all the ants. In other words, when they're not familiar with each other, they end up killing each other. Interesting. Now, it's only if they're not familiar with each other. What does that mean? Number one, it's only if these two ant mounds or ant holes are bitrei ivra nahar on two sides of the river, two opposite sides of the river means they never met each other. And not only that, it's not enough for them to be in two opposite sides of the river. It's only if there's no bridge, because if there's a bridge, guys, ants will find a way across. And not only there's no bridge, there's not a gamma, there's no plank, there's not even a rope. Who delays a mitzvah? And at kama, at parsa, the Rashi learns, even if there's a river in between it, and there isn't a bridge, a plank, and a rope, still, if it's within a parsa, they know each other's shmek. They are familiar with each other. That's the way Rashi learns. In other words, if they never knew each other, the way you destroy ants is by introducing other ants. It's worthwhile. And how the havdil and the apinodes, the lesson is there's things that we learn from an ant, right? Chazal say that they have a phenomenal work ethic, but what we should learn how not to be is like this, is that when you introduce something foreign, okay, that's the whole beauty of the Jewish people, that even when we never met each other, the Baal Shem Tov, you don't know each other, that we have obviously sold to every single Jew to be continued.
Rabbi, animals that have to graze. Maybe you said something about that. Animals that have to graze on the land that during the Shemitah year.
Mamish not a problem. Mamish not a problem. Not only is it not a problem, but if I own an animal, I am not allowed to my animals.
Rabbi, question.
Yes.
What's the deal with the issues? Like, was this such a common animal over there at that time?
Yeah, for sure.
There? Yeah.
In other words, that the key, the issue here is if you have a rodent and the rodent is ruining some of your produce, that's a davar ha'avet, no doubt. You can work. The question is, we'll see whether you have to make a shinui.
But dafka issues, like I get the part about asparos, what. I've never heard of such a creature in my life.
Let me say, okay. Issues is also used, Yaakov, for marriage, right? That I think to have a successful marriage, you have to be a little bit blind.
Yeah.